Coming up on This Week in Computer Hardware, do you need 8 gigs of RAM on your next GPU? iPhone 6 A8 benchmark GTX 974G is the sweet spot. G-Sync or Adaptive Sync? Choose wisely. Oh yeah, Windows 10 is here, by the way. All that and more coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 287, recorded October 2nd, 2014. Choose your GPU wisely.
This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Citrix GoToAssist, the #1 global market leader in remote support. Sign up for GoToAssist before October 10th to get another Citrix product free for 6 months. Visit GoToAssist.com and get started.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Twitch's weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most informative, most helpful, and most delightfully presented hardware information on the planet. Ladies and gentlemen, desktop, laptop, mobile, occasionally even smartphones, and once in a great long while, hammers. Mr. Ryan Shrout and I are here to inform, engage, and answer your questions. Ladies and gentlemen, straight from the heart of Kentucky, Florence to be exact, Mr. Ryan Shrout.
All right, I'll go for that. I'm not sure if I would ever say that what we do is graceful, but
no,
you know.
No, I would actually, I'm comfortable saying that you and I are not particularly graceful in most aspects of our existence.
But we get the job done is what is important.
You know, it's like a sack of hammers. When you need one, it's good to have it. Just never looks very elegant when you pick it up. Oh my goodness. Speaking of not elegant, we're just going to lurch right into the show right now. Windows 10 released this week. We'll talk about that a bit later. But first, an update on a big story last week. Alan Malventano wrote about this. We talked about it on the show last week with Josh. So the Samsung 840 EVO are suffering from degradation in performance over time in their write speeds, which is a big deal because you want your write speeds to be fast, don't you? Don't you, kids?
No,
you want to
this is
write files.
even worse. These are read speeds.
Oh, read speeds. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's been over 90 degrees in my office most of this afternoon. So if I seem dehydrated and slightly confused, it's heat prostration and not aging. But or maybe it is aging, making my heat prostration worse. But Samsung actually further acknowledged, basically Samsung acknowledged that there was a problem with degradation of performance over time because of the way they handle any of a number of things in the firmware on the drive. But Samsung has, as of September 26th, a couple days after we talked about this, there's a new quote from Samsung. They say, quote, "We acknowledge the recent issue associated with the Samsung 840 EVO SSDs and are qualifying a firmware update to address the issue. While this issue only affects a small subset of all 840 EVO users, we regret any inconvenience experienced by our customers. A firmware update that resolves the issue will be available on the Samsung SSD website soon. We appreciate our customers' support and patience as we work diligently to resolve this issue." So if you didn't listen to the show last week, you missed out because it was amazing. And you should subscribe at twitch.tv/Twitch. But essentially, what happened was there was a whole bunch of forums where people were discussing slowdowns in the 840 and 840 EVO SSDs. And where did it go? Where did it go? Where did it go? Essentially, there was the chart. Yes, that is an apparent slowdown in the reading of stale data on TLC-based Samsung SSDs. And you'll notice that's a pretty big slowdown.
Yeah, it's dramatic.
Dramatic is a good word for that. So Samsung's, it's legit. It's happening. Samsung says it's a small portion of the drives out there. They also noticed that temperature was impacting drive speeds.
We do. I do have one gripe with their statement. When they say a small subset of users, I honestly believe that is completely inaccurate. I think it is it will affect every single user. It's just a matter of how much they notice it. And if you have data on a drive that's been sitting there for 8 weeks or longer, just sitting there, like a game install, something that is never written to over again. You will see performance degradation. So, they're doing their best to kind of, make things seem nicer, right? Like, oh, it's a small subset. I would say it's a small subset of users that have mentioned the problem out loud, because this was the biggest selling SSD for a long time. And
I own one, you own one, Alan has like 17. I think Josh
it's
uses
ironic.
them.
It's ironic in that our GPU test bed uses it as the storage drive. We have a 500 gig drive for our game installs, which essentially is the absolute worst case scenario for this problem, right? We install a bunch of games to it, and then all we ever do is read back from them. We never write that data again, and as time goes on, that data will be slower and slower and slower. Now, I have Alan here, so I can say, hey, do something to make this fast again, and he'll do that. But most people don't have an Alan.
And if they did, well, they should consider themselves lucky. If you look at the second page of that, buried in what Alan describes as a beast of a thread, Burke, look for the chart with the blue vertical stripes on it, off of overclock.net. But it's essentially what this chart's looking at is over a period of days, no weeks. There we go. As you get farther and farther to the right, you notice it kind of settles in at around 100 megabytes. Like, yes. So you're dropping to like 61 megabytes per second from a high of 500, 600 plus megabytes per second.
Yeah.
So that's a huge degradation. And essentially what happened is to oversimplify in a way that'll probably make Alan pound his head on the desk if he's listening to this later on, is the magnetic impulse, the electricity that means your bits inside the SSD, it becomes less over time, and the drive goes into error correcting mode, trying to find the missing bit. Because that's what Alan pointed out to me like 3 times. We talked about it before the show. No one's lost any data, but the sort of electrical energy that signifies a bit inside of that drive is becoming so faint that the drive goes into error correction mode and scans and scans and scans and scans and scans and scans. So it goes, oh, I've got a bit. And then it goes to the next one and scans and scans and scans and scans. So no data is lost. It just becomes more and more difficult to read over time. So yes, I imagine Samsung's going to fix that pretty fast. And if you notice your drive slowing down, it is time to patch that puppy. And I would, because I'm wild and reckless this way, and I'm running Windows 10 on the system that Skype is running on right now during the podcast. Watch it cut out. You know, I would say apply that if you own an 840 or 840 Evo with the appropriate technology inside of it. I would just go ahead and apply that firmware update when Samsung releases it. That's I'm getting a head nod from Alan. That makes me happy. While we're talking SSDs, what's going on with the Micron M600s or dynamic write acceleration?
Yeah, this is the review of the technology we probably talked about a couple, 3-4 weeks ago now, where you had flash memory chips that could actually be switched dynamically on the fly from SLC to MLC or back and forth, right? The advantages of SLC is that your write speed is significantly faster and power consumption is lower while you're doing writes. The disadvantage is cost. It takes twice as much flash memory to have a set capacity of flash on a drive, while in MLC it's more cost efficient. So that's why most drives have used MLC. We've seen some other tricks like TLC that include SLC cache on some of them, which is what the Samsung 840 and 840 Evo use. What the Micron M600 does is that it will basically, if you buy a 256 gig SSD, it installs in the system, Windows sees it as a 256 gig SSD, you just use it as normal. But what is happening internally is that it is essentially configured as a 128 gig SLC product. So your write speeds will be very fast. In theory, your read speeds will be just the same. But as you fill that drive up, say you get close to that 50% margin, or that 50% of your capacity, you're almost full on the SLC. What it will begin to do is copy that data off, convert a section of flash to MLC, and then copy that data back. And as you fill up the drive, the idea is that you will eventually convert all of that to MLC. Your read speeds will be the same. Your write speeds will definitely go down some, but you will have good performance for a certain amount of time. And if you empty that drive again and give it time to clean things up, it will be fast again. It was an interesting take on the balance of performance and cost. Now, the problem is It sounds great, but I also thought it sounded kind of complicated. And as it turns out, if you look at the results page of the M600, you'll find that what Alan determined was that the results were variable. There was a lot of variation in the results. So the testing methodology had to change, right? This was a totally unique idea to us. So he basically would fill the drive with 10%, empty drive, run your performance test. Fill the drive with 10% of data, run some tests. Fill the drive with 20% data, run some tests. 30% data, run some tests, and so on, and see how performance changes. But if you look at those graphs, what you'll see is the speeds don't seem to follow a pattern, which is what we would expect. We would expect it to be really fast at the beginning and then slow down towards the end, or have a longer period of slow data towards the end. But as you can see, it's kind of like, I don't know, like if you look at the top of those, if you look at the very top of those, you'll see the very first result, 440 megabytes per second. That's great. That's about what you expect for write speeds. The second one, 154 megs per second. That's pretty bad. That is with 10% full, but then it jumps back up at 20% full and falls back down at 50% full. And then if you look down a little bit at the 256 gig model, it varies even a little bit more. It seems to be slower when it's empty, and then it goes up, and then it's down again at like 50%, but then up, and then down a whole bunch at like 80%. You're getting down into the 70s of megabytes per second, if you will. And that's kind of disappointing. And another way to look at it is if you look at those red and green ADO results towards the bottom of that page, Bark, you'll see that if you look at like the second picture, go down one more, there you go. So the red lines represent your write speeds, and see how they just kind of bounce around, right? They're not showing any useful pattern, really. The green has a very, that's the read speeds. It's doing what you expect, but the red kind of bounces around and jumps around, and it does on the next one too. And so it's a problem in that we don't even really know what to tell people to expect for performance. This is something that we're going to have to do more testing, different types of testing. We're working with Micron to try to figure out, hey, what are we doing that you weren't expecting? Or what are we doing that is breaking your technology if your technology is working right? Or is your technology not working right? And do you need to fix it? And that seems to be where we're leaning right now. And that's disappointing because the cost of this drive is going to be pretty good, right? A 1 terabyte model MSRP for $450 would be great. But we don't know if it is going to be affected by these issues. So
I'm laughing because I'm like searching the 840 Evo 1 terabyte on Amazon just because I'm wondering what the eventually slow hard drive. That's humor, by the way. Right now a Samsung 840 Evo 1 terabyte drive is $440. Speaking of things that have dropped precipitously in price.
Yeah, and maybe not unwarranted. So
Micron, fix it.
It's a really interesting idea. I feel like either the next iteration of this product, or maybe even with the firmware update, like they could figure it out so that it's consistent and it's repeatable and it's something that people know what to expect. Because right now they just don't have that.
Hate that. In case you were not paying attention to the internet this week, or whenever you're listening to the podcast, Windows 10 was released, a Windows 10 technical preview, which is kind of weird because we all expected it to be Windows 9 because right now we're on Windows 8.1. There are many rumors about why we are suddenly leaping and dancing towards Windows 10, mostly around everything from programmers claiming it's an issue with notation inside of the code, to Apple fanboys congratulating Windows and finally catching up to the other X, aka 10. I'm actually running it on the system that Skype is running on right now. My apologies for pointing at you. The biggest difference right now, of course, is that there is a start menu with live tiles so you can customize. Search is built into the universal search down there on that big old button in the corner. Metro is not dead. Or the operating system interface formerly known as Metro that was later known as something else that is kind of currently known as universal apps. So the idea is that they're going to have apps that vary across, or I should say universal apps that work across everything from the phones to the 2-in-1s to the desktops to the laptops to tablets. It's interesting. If you want to check it out, Windows Insider Program is the place to go. You can get there from the blog.windows.com. I got to say, I like the start menu. I think the tiles actually work pretty well in the start menu. Everything runs inside of a window. So, you know, the apps, the modern apps, which was the name for the Metro apps, which we're no longer allowed to call them Metro, but basically everything runs in a Windows now. So instead of having gigantic applications that take over the entire space, you don't have to deal with that anymore. Some new task view buttons. The best thing I think though is that there's multiple desktops available. So they've kind of done something that Linux has done for years and OS X has done recently. So you can create multiple desktops. I'm kind of liking it so far. It's been super stable, but you cannot, you know, if you only have one machine at home or at work, do not install Windows 10 on it unless you can live without that machine if everything goes sideways, because you can't downgrade it unless you have already imaged your machine before you and back up your files before you download the technical preview, just in case everything goes sideways. Call me old-fashioned, but back up twice, die slowly once.
I have not personally installed it on a system yet. I've been just doing other stuff this week, but I really feel like what I need to do is replace the system with it, right? So I have this habit of having a primary phone and then having a secondary phone, and I go, well, I'm just trying out this phone. But the truth is, if you're not using that device as you would really use it as if your only phone, you're not actually. Yeah, you're not learning what you should about it. You're not putting it through its paces. And I feel like the same thing would happen with Windows 10 is that if I've got it as a VM that I go into sometimes when I'm just using the internet because what use is that, right? So unless you copy all your applications to it and try to use it in a productivity environment, maybe, I don't know how, I haven't heard any reports yet on what it is like gaming wise.
Right.
But I know AMD has publicly said that their 14.9 driver is ready for it. I don't know if Nvidia has said if their drivers are ready for it yet, but it does ship with an Nvidia driver out of the box. So something worth considering for sure. I'm eager to try it. Like I like some of the changes they did. Hey, they changed the command prompt. You can now control and copy and paste in the command prompt. That's a big deal. What else can you do now that you couldn't do before? I love the multiple desktops. I like the 4-way snap, the ability to put things different corners. And I'm wondering now, if you have like a 4K display, if that makes it tremendously more friendly for you. And did they fix anything with the text scaling or the DPI scaling with Windows 10 that they had not actually done in Windows 8.1 yet? So hopefully, probably not this week, but maybe next week I'll be able to. I think what I'm going to do is swap out my monitors for a couple of 4K monitors and then take out that SSD, put in a new SSD, install Windows 10 fresh, and kind of try to just use it as a system and see what happens. I don't know. I worry about application compatibility at this point and stuff like that. So
I've only run a few things so far, but I don't think at this point it's that far from Windows 8 in terms of its code base that it's creating a lot of problems. It's interesting. They've got some features inside of it they're supposed to do, like, you know, detect whether or not your device is plugged into a keyboard, or if you're in tablet mode, if you have a tablet, you know, sort of a a convertible laptop. Yeah. It's interesting. So, I mean, you know, I've been running it for like 18 hours so far. And nothing's gone horribly wrong yet. And I'm using it in a live production mode.
That's good.
Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves for a block of graphics news. First up, in what I thought was a shocking revelation, Nvidia has confirmed it has no plans to support adaptive sync, therefore making sure that we must choose one path or another.
Yeah, as one of my lines in this story was, the dream of having a VRR monitor, that's variable refresh rate monitor, that will run on both vendors' GPUs appears to be dead.
Thud.
It's really interesting. I generally am okay with what Nvidia does in terms of they want to make technologies and keep them proprietary. I think this decision may come back to haunt them at some point, but their stance is, based on an interview we did with them here in our studio, was that they were 100% dedicated to G-Sync. They're going to continue to invest in G-Sync. They have no need for adaptive sync, and we have no intention to implement it. And some people have said, well, then they're not going to be able to have DisplayPort 1.3 capable stuff. But it's important to note that the adaptive sync portion of the DisplayPort standard is entirely optional. In DP 1.2a, it's optional. DP 1.3, it's optional. So nobody has to support it, either a GPU vendor or a scaler vendor or anything else for that matter. It is totally optional. So they're not breaking any rules by doing it. But what they are doing is preventing the possibility of having a single monitor that would be able to run both G-Sync and AMD FreeSync, essentially. Because I think I even asked specifically, when asked about the possibility of seeing future monitors that can support both NVIDIA G-Sync as well as adaptive sync technology, Peterson stated that while not impossible, he would, quote, not expect to see such a device. So there's that. So,
oh, we could do it, but we're not going to.
Well, think of it this way. NVIDIA and G-Sync, they replaced the scaler with their own chip. Right, with their what is now an FPGA will probably be an ASIC in the not too distant future. If they're not going to support adaptive sync, why would they put support for adaptive sync in that piece of silicon that they're making, right? So I get why they wouldn't do it and why they wouldn't try to validate it and why they wouldn't spend the cost on it. It's unfortunate for people that would want to buy one monitor and switch between GPU vendors, right? So you are now more or less going to be locked into if you buy a monitor, if you think variable refresh rate is an important technology, and I can tell you based on experience of using it that it is an important technology, then your decision is going to be based on what GPU you want and then what monitor you want, and then that monitor that you purchase that for most people is a much longer term investment than a video card will mandate your video card choices for the foreseeable future, which is clearly what Nvidia wants, right? I mean,
I can feel that kind of emanating from this decision. I mean, it was funny because I was kind of laughing because we did that $380 PC build, which was inspired by the low cost parts roundup you guys did, and it was funny that people were really cranky, like, well, you didn't include the price of a monitor in this and a keyboard and a mouse. And I'm like, I know 4 gamers that play more than 25 hours a week. They've been using the same monitor for 5 years across 2 PCs, and in one case the same keyboard for 7 years. And it's like, by the way, consoles use the television, and I actually use my television for gaming. But I bring that up because most people sit on monitors for a really long time. I mean, I don't think I've had any monitor that I didn't use either in single or as the secondary monitor with a new monitor for less than 5 years. In some cases, I think I've had a monitor running close to 7 years now. So this is a big choice, and if the price performance shifts a lot in either way, it's going to be tough for either company, I think.
It is, and AMD can play this up to their benefit, and I'm sure they absolutely will, as being the guy that's open, the guy that's not closed, not proprietary. Look, we're basing our monitor on an open standard. NVIDIA refuses to do so. NVIDIA's stance has been and continues to be that the adaptive sync technology in that DisplayPort standard is incredibly basic and does not actually create a good experience for the consumer. It is one of the tools needed to create that experience for the consumer, but they continue to say that, hey, this is really, really hard. We spent years on this, and we don't think that AMD is just going to be able to turn it on and make it work, right? And essentially, if they started to use adaptive sync, it would be very easy for AMD to basically take whatever NVIDIA's implementation of adaptive sync is and kind of rip it off whole heart and utilize it themselves. So it's just something to keep in mind. Like, if you bought a G-Sync monitor already, this was already your path, right? Like, you already knew G-Sync was never going to work on anything but NVIDIA cards. But if you're one of the people holding off for adaptive sync monitors, thinking, well, this will work with FreeSync and it'll work with NVIDIA cards. Not so much. So now you can make that. Yeah.
They are forking.
Now you can
wisely.
go ahead and make your decision. Yep. Agreed.
Oh my goodness. Latest version of the AMD Catalyst software suite, AMD Catalyst 14.9, is designed to support the following Microsoft Windows platforms: Windows 8.1, 32-bit and 64-bit versions, Windows 7, 32-bit and 64-bit versions with SP1 or higher. So we got support for the AMD Radeon R9 280. I should point out that since I am leaping ahead, this is the AMD Catalyst 14.9 for Windows update. Jeremy Hellstrom carefully put together a long list of specs for the AMD Catalyst 14.9 Windows driver. AMD Radeon R9 280 performance improvements, comparing AMD Catalyst 14.9 versus AMD Catalyst 14.4, 3D Mark Skydiver, Firestrike, 3D Mark 11, Bioshock, Company of Heroes 2, Crysis 3, Grid Autosport. I love how they list, like, Tomb Raider, AMD Radeon R9 290 series improves up to 5%.
I don't even know what this means. Like,
Watch Dogs improved crossfire performance up to 20%.
Yeah,
up to 9% improvement on. Sorry,
I was gonna say the problem with some of these metrics are, we don't want to name them all. Like the up to 20% in crossfire performance could be like one scene for 2 seconds for this specific instance at this quality settings, right? So hit or miss on whether or not these are going to be as much as they tend to believe. Assassin's Creed 4 crossfire scaling up to 93%. That says a lot. That says more about how poor the scaling was before. But hey, I'm okay with that. The only thing that really, one of the things rather that stood out to me is pretty interesting is that they were bringing Mantle to AMD mobile products. So if you had AMD Mobile with Enduro technology, Battlefield 4, Thief, Starswarm, and Sniper Elite 3 that just released a Mantle patch today, actually, will now have Mantle support. So if you want to try those out, try that alternative API, you can do so. And this is apparently the driver you should install if you're running Windows 10. Technical preview. So
sadly, I'm not running on anything that has discrete graphics at the moment. Although I may dual boot my gaming desktop just for the unbridled joy of having 2 operating systems on one machine.
It'll be like the old days.
No, I don't want it to be like the old days. I want it to be better than the old days. Speaking of which, getting better, EVGA Hydro Copper GTX 980 water block, early performance testing. Mr. Ryan Shrout on PC Per.
Wait, who?
That's you, man.
Was that me?
You apparently have been fondling a giant copper water block. Hydro copper water block.
Last week during that live stream where our air conditioning died, Jacob from EVGA was here, and he had this here. It had been overnighted directly from Taiwan for our live stream, and it was just the water block itself, no card attached to it. And as he was packing up and he was getting ready, he was like, "Hey, what if you just left that here for a couple of days?" He was like, I don't really know about that. I was like, yeah, but what if you did? What if you just left it here accidentally and I got to use it for a little while? And he said, all right, I need it back by Wednesday or whatever it was. So this was actually the very, very, very first and only prototype of this water block, the EVGA EK water block that we got our hands on. And I have to say, so basically its performance is awesome. Now we hooked it up to a fairly beefy water cooling setup, 360 millimeter radiator, with a coolants pump and reservoir with another 120 millimeter rad, I think, in there. And overclocked as far as I could overclock it, which I'll mention in a second how much that is. And at the maximum voltage I could send it, which we'll talk about that as well. Under full gaming load, we're talking 42 degrees Celsius, which is about half of what we were getting with the air coolers. So we were around 82C for the reference cooler, and we were at about 42C with this. And obviously, noise levels will vary depending on what kind of fans you're using and how fast they're spinning. But we had a lot of headroom to pull those fans back if we wanted to, but we were just trying to get some quick results out there. So, very cool chip, a lot of headroom in there potentially. But the problem was with that voltage. If you look at the second page and you look at the first line graph I have there, it shows clock speed comparisons in Metro Last Light. The green line at the top is the EVGA GTX 980 Hydro Copper setup that we were using. And you can see we hit 1582 megahertz, which is awesome compared to the 1210 megahertz reference, but really only 100 megahertz faster than we were able to get with the overclocked on the air cooler, right? From 1483 to 1582.
Right.
So the reason is, but then if you look, actually, if you scroll down one more graph there, Burke, you'll see the temperature graph. And notice that green line at the bottom, that is with the water cooler. And that red line all the way at the top is the overclocked, you know, with the air cooler. Those are the 3 air cooler results up top there. So clearly, this GPU, this water block is able to keep this GPU incredibly cool. But the problem is, as it's set up today, NVIDIA does not allow you to push more than an 87 millivolt offset of GPU voltage to the chip. Without getting into some soldering irons and other hardware modifications, you cannot yet change it. And I think most people are finding that even if you hack the BIOS of these cards, you will not be able to increase voltage higher than what this is. You know, thanks to NVIDIA's voltage regulation. Now, which means there's probably a ton of headroom left in this part that we can't access, like that we don't have the capability to utilize with water cooling like this because of the lockdown voltages, which kind of stinks. This is very similar to what happened with the GTX 680 a 3 years ago.
Right.
And the problem there was the same thing. You know, you could cool it down a whole bunch, but you couldn't change the voltage. And the problem is that a lot of NVIDIA's board partners, like EVGA, want to sell these super overclocked parts. You know, EVGA is going to sell this GPU with this water block pre-installed, but is it worth buying it? Is it worth making that product if you're only able to get 100 megahertz faster than you could get with an air cooler? I don't know, right? So NVIDIA, yeah, what's that? Yeah.
What's the price fig we're looking at to go water cooling?
This water block's probably $150.
Ouch. So, I mean, and we should point out that's $150, assuming you already have a pump, a radiator, a cooling system inside your machine, and you're willing to pull all of that apart to install this new water block for the GPU. So, I mean, water block, you know, water cooling or liquid cooling enthusiasts obviously would be on the list. People looking for the ultimate in performance. And
I've already heard from some people in the comments are just like, hey, I'm not interested in overclocking, but I'd love to see those parts at 40C, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't really understand that mentality a whole bunch, because the GPU is perfectly fine at 80C. It's not going to catch on fire or anything like that. And we have seen on the last page, on the second page of that article, if you go to the very last line, there's actually a link to a Kingpin, who's one of those professional overclocker guys who does LN2, and he used LN2 on a GTX 980 with a voltage mod and was able to get 2054 megahertz, I think.
Wow,
is what it was on this part. Right now, obviously, we're not going to get that high with water cooling.
No,
but I don't think it's awesome. I think it's very likely that you'll be able to get 1700 megahertz, maybe 1800 megahertz, if we had the ability to increase voltage to this GPU. And I don't, you know, go ahead.
Is there a possibility that they could do a firmware update that would allow you to increase the voltage, or is that just, you're pretty sure that's locked down?
There is. I don't think NVIDIA would have made it so they wouldn't have that option down the road. I think they have that option. Now, whether or not they will only do that for, you know, GPUs that they sell later to these companies specifically, with maybe like limited warranty terms or something like that, that's very possible. The community is very capable of finding ways around this, right? Like you can already go see how to do the hardware voltage mods if you want to. I just didn't have enough time or the guts really to go tearing apart one of my GTX 980s quite yet. But maybe in the not too distant future, that will be something that we'll attempt to do, right? Just to see what we can actually get out of it. But it's a really, really cool cooler. Haha. And
no pun intended.
Yeah, just bad speaking skills. It's a very nice cooler that produces really good results. Unfortunately, the GPU isn't at the point yet where I would recommend buying this unless, you know, you don't want to overclock, which seems dumb.
Yeah.
Right. Like this
or
is,
you're a
this is
gambler.
that part. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you just go, well, I'm going to buy it now because I think they will address that in the not too distant future.
And I will say that I'm the last person to say this, but it's a really cool looking card if you're into that kind of thing.
Very cool. It's
a little soft glow inside of your case, illuminating your incredibly awesome EVGA water block.
Yep.
We got a question from the chat room I'm going to insert here just for fun. KDH says, Patrick, best graphics card to support 4K monitor. Katie does do gaming. We'll be using it for work and such, Netflix, but gaming, general work, Netflix, all that good stuff. I bring that up because you have a review of the MSI GeForce GTX 970 gaming 4G sitting right in the sweet spot. So at this point, would a 970 be kind of an entry level GPU? You're not going to turn all your settings up on a 4K system with a single 970. You might barely be gaming at all.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you need to look at it at least a 980. You know, if you're an Nvidia fan, a 980 is where you want to start looking. If you're an AMD fan, a Radeon R9 290X is really the minimum for 4K gaming. And it wouldn't surprise me if you need to jump up to multiple cards. Now, what you could do is you could take two of those 970s and run them in SLI, or two 290s and run them in Crossfire and play on a 4K screen that way. And you would be so two 970s would be like $700, which is, you know, $150 more than the 980, but you're going to get a significant performance improvement over that. So a pair of 970s might make the most sense for somebody who's going to game at 4K today. But if you look in if you go to the PCPer.com review of the GTX 980 and 970, we have 4K results in that review. And it shows you single GPU and it shows you dual GPU with 980s. And so you can get an idea of, and there are some cases where even a pair of 980s struggles to keep up with what a 4K screen needs, right? You know, the amount of pixels that need to be pushed into that display. It's an interesting, right? And then we just recently looked at the Acer 4K G-Sync screen. And that is, you know, again, if you have unlimited money, that's the best 4K screen to get for gaming if you're going to buy an Nvidia video card, because then if you're running at frame rates at like 40 or 50, which you are much more likely to be doing at 4K than you would at any lower resolution, then your presentation of those frames will be very smooth and without tearing, without stuttering with a G-Sync display. So it's an interesting state we are in with that. Like, we're kind of right on that cusp. I think you can do it if you're willing to invest the money. But I would go with at least a single GTX 980 or 290X for that. So you're looking at least a $500 or so video card investment in addition to that monitor. So,
oh my goodness, yeah, it's expensive. Which brings us to the MSI GeForce GTX 970 gaming 4G is sitting right in the sweet spot. Jeremy wrote that up fast. Quote, it is sadly out of both stock on both Newegg and Amazon right now, but MSI's $350 GTX 970 gaming 4G is an incredible buy and worth waiting for. Factory overclock inside of that 1140, 1279 megahertz, which hard OCP actually observed hit as high as 1366 megahertz until they overclocked it and hit 1542 megahertz before the 110% GPU power limitation ended their fun. Which gives us back to, it would seem that the card is capable of more if only you were not prevented from feeding it more than the extra 10%. And it was already beating the 7080 Ti and the R8 290 before the overclock, but you should read the full review to see what happened once they tested it at full speed. It's up on hardocp.com, and that is a pretty badass card for $350.
Yep, I've got one
but
here.
Not enough
Looking forward to playing around with it some more. Yeah,
you know, still not enough for 4K gaming. So KDH, fire up your credit card and prepare to melt. Nexus 6 rumors are all over the map. It's going to be 6 inches. It's going to be glorious. It's going to be a Moto X with a camera that doesn't suck. It's going to be ponies. It's going to be something. But the latest rumor around Google and Nexus is that the Google Nexus 9 is going to be using an NVIDIA Tegra K1. Scott wrote this up. quick and fast for PCPro.com. Nexus 9 is expected for Q3, much like the Nexus 6 or the Nexus, whatever they call the next Nexus. Are you excited? Are you curious to see whether or not it's going to be a Tegra K1 inside the Nexus, or are you just over tablets at this point?
No, I want it to be in there, but from a purely, I don't know, like the more. I think that the performance that you get and the features in the Tegra K1 are really, really unique for tablets, and I want to see that explored more. I'm not sure it's the winning solution necessarily, but I want to see it explored more. And what that will require is more games and game developers writing content that is specifically targeting Tegra K1. So if you get a Nexus 9 with a Tegra K1, it's going to sell a lot of units, and thus more game developers will have the desire or the capability to invest the time in the support for those types of really, really impressive tablet gaming experiences. So as much as I like the Shield tablet, which I do, it's not going to sell nearly as many machines or units as the Nexus 9 would if it has a Tegra K1. So I'm sure that would be a big boon for Nvidia. That would be a big boon even for the Shield tablet itself.
Right.
Because you can, if you have more games that are really awesome, that look great on Tegra K1, then every other Tegra K1 tablet will be raised, you know, at the same amount, right? Rising tide and all that. So I want it to be there. I don't know if it will be. Hopefully we'll just figure it out and get it done soon. But pretty interesting evidence coming out of their legal documentation, right? That was afterwards removed. So
it's interesting. Android Police also had an interesting article. Should you still be curious? Love that shot of the Nexus 6. Somebody spotted a person carrying a 6-inch phone with running Android L, or I should say, Android, basically the next generation Android operating system, bigger than a Moto X with buttons in a different position. It's interesting. I'm kind of curious to see where this all turns out. And still, by the way, no announcement from Google on when the event might be. Not that I would be invited, but it would just be nice to know. You guys did an iPhone 6 Apple A8 test. Ken Addison got busy running benchmarks. Was it awesome? Did. Was it glorious?
No. Let me ask you this: do you have a 6? Do you have an iPhone 6? Or are you using a 6 yet?
I am currently still on an Android. I'm kind of waiting. I'm kind of waiting to hear the announcement and to see the camera on the Nexus, the next generation Nexus, which I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm sure is still going to be leaps and bounds behind the camera on the iPhone 6. I desperately want the camera on the iPhone 6. It is a extraordinary piece of engineering and a badass camera, and it's inside of a phone. But I'm going to wait a little bit longer to see what the camera inside of the next generation Nexus looks like. I also got to say I'm thrilled that the iPhone 6 has a bigger screen, which I think the iPhone desperately needed. I'm not sure if I'm quite ready for a 6 Plus, but I also carried around a Note, and after 2 weeks of carrying around a Note, I actually really liked the phablet lifestyle, whatever that means.
I don't want to know. I don't want to ask what it means. I would say my takeaway from Ken's results here are that the A8 is not nearly the performance boost that I think many people expected, right? It was, it's on 20 nanometer technology, so we assume it's going to have some inherent performance increases, but it didn't really seem to have that. Modest increases in CPU performance, modest increases in GPU performance, but maybe a little bit more on the GPU side than on the CPU side. But if you look at it purely at its raw form, like the Tegra K1 GPU is way faster. However, every time I say that, I need to make sure I credit it with, yes, but the Tegra K1 is always running in tablets. The A8 is, in this case, running in a phone. So it's going to be more thermally limited and more TDP limited than anything out there. So I don't know. I think it was interesting to see it up close, but we're still working on kind of a experience review of what the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus have, because Alan got the 6 Plus and Ken got the 6. So we've got a good mix going around.
The pixel count difference between those two is huge, and that's kind of a big deal when you're looking at performance. I would also say, before anybody starts firing out emails to Twitch at twit.tv telling us that we're scum for questioning the benchmarks put forward by Apple, I have long history. A long and involved history of dealing with Apple's benchmarks. And let me assure you, Apple has never had an issue with staging their benchmarks in a way that was mostly true in a court of law, but vastly slanted in their favor, including doing things like massive optimizations on code for their processors while leaving, the oldest possible code or benchmark format on the opposition's processors. That was a big thing they used to have so much fun with. No, it was intentional. Accident my ass.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I know. People cheat on benchmarks. It happens. Not as often as it used to, but it still happens. But it's kind of funny. It's like, look, the other thing is, like, there's more than enough processor inside there to run a phone, and probably more than enough processors in anything the most advanced games are going to be able to operate on a phone. Yeah. So, there's some mapping applications I would kill to see running on an iPhone 6 right now, just because, I've been using them on iPhone 4Ss or iPad 2s. So the jumping like 3 generations of a, from an A something to an A7 processor, A8 processor would be huge. A huge and delightful experience. Not so delightful looking unless you're into having the snot scared out of yourself by terrifying machinery with feet and hands and blood. The evil within system requirements. Scott wrote this one up too. Shinichi Mikami has been developing a survival horror game, which makes sense given a good portion of his portfolio. He created Resident Evil and much of the following franchise. The Evil Within is about to release, having recently gone gold. At around this time, publishers began to release system requirements, and Bethesda does not disappoint in that regard. This is what we recommend. It will run on less. Hope it does. The requirements, I think, start with a GeForce GTX 670 with 4 gigabytes of VRAM, a quad-core i7, 4 gigabytes of system memory, 50 gigabytes of hard drive space, and a 64-bit OS. So what's going on with Rage, man?
So it's weird. Like, it's recommending a 4 gigabyte excuse me, a 4 gigabyte frame buffer graphics card. The GTX 670 is not particularly it's a good GPU, but it's not the fastest GPU out there today. But that frame buffer size is exceptionally high, which is what made it noteworthy. Everything else, the system requirements, Core i7 or better, 4 gigs of memory, 50 gigs of disk space. But that's a lot of disk space, but it works out. And it will require 64-bit OS. This is running on the Rage engine. Everybody who remembers the Rage game itself had issues with texture pop-in. And I'm sure what the added recommended frame or graphics memory size is, let's load more textures up in there than we did before so that we don't have any of those pop-in issues that we had previously. I put a note in the system or in the show notes here, but I don't think I had a link. The Middle Earth Shadow of Mordor requirements are actually maybe more cool or depressing depending on how you look at it. Like there's a free HD content download pack for it, right? That allows you to enable an ultra quality setting in that game. And it actually has minimum recommended system requirements of a Core i7-3770, or an AMD FX 8350, 8 gigs of RAM, and a video card with 6 gigs of memory. So even beyond what the 4 gigs there. And that's kind of crazy to think about because there's really only like one card, maybe a handful of cards that have 6 gigs of frame buffer on it, like the Titan or the Titan Black have 6 gigs. But you look at the new GTX 980, it only has 4. R9 290X, it only has 4. I don't know what their intent was with those types. I don't know what their goal was with that. But
right. Well, they
I
seem
can
to
say
have
that I've been playing it, and it doesn't seem to drop off that badly when you enable the HD texture pack. But
I don't know. It's funny when you go to the Evil Within You scroll down. I don't know if they added this later, but minimum requirements are now Windows 7/8.1, a GTX 460 or an equivalent 1 gigabyte VRAM card, i7 or equivalent 4+ core processor, and 4 gigabytes of RAM. But the recommended specs, yeah, i7 with 4+ cores, 4 gigs of RAM, GTX 670 with 4 gigabytes of VRAM. It's interesting. It's funny. Are we finally going to see in 2015 sort of the long coming flood of games? Like, will a majority of games 2015 actually demand quad core processors?
I hope so. Right? Like, again, I want the games to get better. I want the quality to get better, and that's going to require them to take steps forward in terms of those minimum system requirements. So I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting little tidbit of information there. Keep that in mind as you build out your systems. I wouldn't specifically look to buy a 6 gigabyte frame buffer card, though. I think you'll be fine.
So not until next year with your 2 terabyte SSD and your ponies and your 24 gigabytes of RAM.
All of that.
And only 24 gigabytes. 32 will be too much. That'll cause the game to slow down. I'm making fun. It's not fun. Actually, it can be fun. What should be fun, what's not funny, what's desperately serious is remote support. Ladies and gentlemen, GoToAssist Remote Support lets you provide live and unattended remote support to any computer or mobile device. You can screen share to diagnose and fix support problems faster, more effectively. And you can use GoToAssist apps to easily deliver support anywhere, anytime. GoToAssist has been a sponsor of the show for a while, and we're glad to have them back. Look, managing your company's IT support needs can be challenging, especially when you have companies that are spread all over the map. Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, if you will, that Ryan is in IT in Kentucky and I am in California in sales, and I desperately need to make this presentation. Was he going to tell me to FedEx my computer back? No, he's going to log in with Citrix GoToAssist. It's good stuff. It's easy to use. It's cloud-based. It basically allows your IT team, your support team, to operate faster and more efficiently. And if you sign up to GoToAssist before October 10th, you'll get another Citrix product of your choice free for 6 months. And since I've just gotten the braces off and can barely speak at this point, let me make that clear. If you sign up for GoToAssist before October 10th, you'll get another Citrix product of your choice free for 6 months. It's really simple. GoToAssist Remote Support lets you provide live and unattended remote support to any computer or mobile device. And you can use GoToAssist apps to easily deliver support anytime, anywhere. If you work in IT, I want you to try GoToAssist because I want you to go home at night. And if you do have to get up at 2 in the morning to support someone, I want you to just have to walk to the nearest computer or your phone and just get things done rather than having to drive into the office or fly from Kentucky to California to fix my computer. I'm just saying. Seriously. Yeah. Sign up for GoToAssist today. Get another Citrix tool free for 6 months. Visit GoToAssist.com and get started. Do not wait, though. The special offer ends October 10th. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank GoToAssist.com for supporting the show. And I want to make sure I've got that address right. Yeah. I thought there was a little bit more to the call to action there, but I'm double checking. Ladies and gentlemen, GoToAssist, sign up before October 10th and get yourself another Citrix tool free for 6 months. There's a lot of cool stuff up there. If you haven't been, you should go. GoToAssist.com, sign up, and get yourself some help supporting the users. Because if they're like Ryan and I, they're difficult. They're not graceful.
Very true. We have time for 1 or 2 emails, probably.
At least one. We've already answered a viewer question from the chat room.
Midstream, if you will.
Should we start with Michael? I kind of run our 970 theme today. Michael says, I'm a big fan of the site and the podcast, so thanks for all your efforts. I'm after some advice as I'm looking to upgrade to a GTX 970 and possibly a 1440p monitor. I love 1440p monitors, but I'm a little concerned about system requirements for current and upcoming titles. There seems to be a need for large amounts of VRAM. Funny you should mention that, with some games requiring 4 gigabytes to run, which brings us to the Bethesda article we talked about recently in Shadow of Mordor, requiring 6 gigabytes to run ultra textures. For a brand new high-end GPU, I'm a little concerned that already some games are requiring 4 gigs, and in the case of Shadow of Mordor, are beyond these cards' capabilities. Rise, on the other hand, still only requires 4 gigabytes for 4K resolution, so I don't know if these other games are just architectured for the unified memory on PlayStation 4 and Xbox and not properly ported to PC. Do you think it's worth waiting around for possible 8 gigabyte versions of the 970? I'm hoping to get at least a couple of years of service out of the card, so don't want to get caught out. Michael, these are great questions. And yeah, Ryan's got the look of pain on his face.
Well, so at 1440, at 2560 by 1440, I don't think you have to worry about a 4 gigabyte frame buffer being too small. The Shadow of Mordor, the Evil Within stuff that we saw, I think they're being very proactive and trying to prevent any kind of backlash from the community. I can tell you that I've been playing the Shadow of Mordor game, doing a lot of testing on it at the Ultra preset, which enables the HD content that has that 6 gigabyte frame buffer recommendation on it. And it's not really the end of the world stuff there, especially at 25 by 14. At 25 or at 4K, it's a little bit harder, but I expect that, right? It's a significantly higher resolution. I would say that you would be fine with a 4 gigabyte card on a 970. Especially for 25 by 14. Yes, 8 is always going to be better than 4. Do I think you should hold off on it? Probably not. There will be some 8 gigabyte models. I would guess they're usually a bit later in the family kind of release schedule from these manufacturers. So I wouldn't wait. If you can find a 970 at a reasonable price, and that's the card you've picked out that you want to get, I would just get it, because I don't think you're going to regret it. 4 gigs is a lot.
It really is. It really is. I mean, it's also just the way that the specs are bumping up. I don't know. It's the squeaky nail gets the hammer grease. And right now the squeaky nail are 2 video games that are asking for all of the textures. I'm mixing metaphors for the sheer unbridled joy of just being confusing as all hell. Jason says, I'm a longtime listener, love the podcast. Thank you, Jason. I have a friend looking for a laptop to run 3D modeling software for designing tools to be made on CNC machines. I don't know the exact demands of the software, but I assume it's graphically intensive. Do you have recommendations for a laptop that is as portable as possible and also in the 15-inch range? Thanks for any help. This is one of those moments where essentially you're probably, here's the problem. We don't know what application your friend is running. We don't know the basic requirements for that application. We don't know if it's even accelerated by consumer GPUs. Generally speaking, I will hurl my neck out there by saying throwing a whole bunch of processor and as much memory as you can find at it is a really good idea. But before you spend, $1,000 or $2,000 on a badass laptop, make sure that it can actually take advantage of an expensive discrete graphics option, because it would suck to go out and pay several $100s extra for a super badass laptop with discrete graphics, and have your friend to find out they could use those graphics for gaming, but not for the CNC design package they use to make their living. So, there's, MSI, the G70 is looking really good for the money. There's a lot of staggeringly expensive laptops that are essentially, $700 worth of desktop, $800 worth of desktop hardware with a battery and a screen selling for like $2,000. I'm exaggerating slightly. I wish I was exaggerating a lot, but because we had somebody looking for an inexpensive gaming laptop. These are not terms that agree.
Right.
At least if you want decent performance.
I think you're right. You do need to find out what the 3D modeling software requires or recommends.
Yeah.
Right? If it doesn't mention a GPU or mentions a very low end GPU, you need to focus on getting the fastest CPU you can get.
Right.
But if it does mention, hey, we're using 3D graphics and we're using OpenCL or whatever it is, or OpenGL, then I agree with Patrick. I think the MSI gaming laptops, there's a ton of options there. You'll definitely find some in the 15-inch range are actually really, really, really nice this time. And yeah, they'll be good. There's a lot of options there.
Oh, here we go. And it turns out if you're looking at AutoCAD, you can enable or disable hardware accelerations.
Sure.
But you need a video card that supports OpenGL in the case of AutoCAD.
Did he say he was using AutoCAD? He just says 3D modeling software. I wasn't specific which one. I'm almost certain that 3D modeling software would use a 3D graphics processor. But, you know, checking which ones it recommends or, you know, if people tend to have preferences for AMD graphics or Nvidia graphics on that front is also worth noting. So
yeah, it's funny. Like I bring up AutoCAD because it's kind of like somebody saying they edit photos. You kind of at some level, if they're spending money, they're probably running Photoshop. It's an assumption.
True.
I may be making an ass out of me and me, you know. But it's funny. Like you definitely want to, you know, you want a 64-bit operating system. Yeah, it's interesting to look at this. You know, they're looking at like for 64-bit AutoCAD 2015, SSE2 technology, Intel Xeon, minimum of an Intel Pentium 4, which is pretty funny, but a minimum of 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, obviously, these are bare minimums.
Burke puts in the document only if you want to render, and that's true. Like if you're rendering, it's definitely you want 3D graphics. But even if you're doing real-time previews and you're rotating models and you're trying to get detail, like it will use GPU horsepower depending on how much detail there is in the model. But you know, again, it's all budget based. I think you could probably get a pretty good MSI 15-inch gaming notebook for like $1,200-1,300, maybe $1,500. It's gonna have enough GPU horsepower to do the 3D modeling necessary for CNC machines. Again, we're both kind of speaking without. I mean, this background behind me was CNC'd, but I wasn't there running the computer when it happened, so I don't really know what that process is.
Man, yeah, it's. I'm just going to walk away from the AutoCAD website because there's just so much to learn there. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to probably wrap the podcast at this point. Otherwise, we will talk about hardware all night long because that is the way we roll here. So far, the Seek thermal camera is operating admirably. There's an iOS version. I'm holding the Android version in my hand. We got a review of that up on techzilla.com along with my first impressions of Windows 10, the operating system that was almost known as Windows 9, but wasn't.
Windows X, Win X, or Win 10.
Win X. OS 10, Win X. I like that. Windows X. It's such an odd concept. What's coming up on PC Perk, man?
Let's see. We have our 970 SLI performance. We have performance in the Shadow of Mordor story going up. We have performance in the new Sniper Elite 3 coming out. That is a game that implements mantle support, which is interesting. And then what else do we have over there? There's some stuff sitting there. How about 3-way and 4-way performance testing of 980s? So,
ooh, I like that.
Yeah,
I like it very much.
A lot of stuff.
Have you ever picked a lock?
Well, I won't tell you.
That sounds like a yes to me, ladies and gentlemen. We actually had some fun on Die Trying last week. We made lock picks out of scrap steel. And let me tell you something. The locks used in most office furniture suck. Or I'm a really good locksmith, one or the other. Lock pick. I'm pretty sure it means the locks at in the desks suck. Just saying. DieTrying.com. It's nothing more horrifying than realizing exactly how not secure personnel files are. I did not open any personnel files. I opened up a similar.
Oh, okay. Yes, gotcha.
No. I work for a 6,000 person company. I don't want to go to prison. Trust me.
No, that's a good idea. No, that's a good plan.
Call me old-fashioned. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware, a.k.a. the Don't Want to Go to Prison episode, has been brought to you by GoToAssist.com and the temerity of Ryan and Patrick. Thank you all so much for listening. If you haven't gone there and subscribed, you can get all the information on how to get the show each and every week delivered to the comfort of your favorite podcatcher at twit.tv/Twitch. Twitch at twit.tv is the email address. He's at Ryan Shrout. I'm at Patrick Norton on the Twitters. PCPer.com is where to find Ryan. Texel.com is where to find me during the rest of the week. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.